They are unsettled because the structure they built on a false foundation has crumbled. You see, when one acts from a place of illusion, trying to bend another's spirit to their will, they operate against the flow of nature. They forget a simple truth. Not the effect it has on you, but the effect it has on themselves. When your path is built upon falsehood, your own inner world begins to lose its harmony. This may not be visible at first. For a time, it might seem as if their method is working, but every illusion eventually meets reality. What remains is a profound sense of inner discord and the difficult awareness that their approach is no longer sustainable. They saw you through a distorted lens. That is what truly disturbs their peace now. They perceived your quiet nature as a lack of strength. They mistook your dedication for an inability to see. They observed your generosity and interpreted it as a sign you could be easily led. And so, they wove a narrative they believed they could control. What they could not foresee was your turning inward, that you would stop providing the energy their imbalance required, that you would choose your own inner stillness over their manufactured chaos, your truth over their pretense, and your integrity over the perceived safety of their world. They did not anticipate your own evolution because it reflects their own patterns back to them. And now, the design they had, it did not just fail. It revealed its own inherent instability. Individuals like this are often resistant to self-reflection. It is difficult to look at one's own true nature in the mirror. It feels easier to have another carry the weight of their own inner turmoil. This is the root of such controlling behavior. This is why they construct these elaborate dynamics, because they cannot find peace with their own inner landscape. So when you find your center, when you reclaim your own path, they don't feel a sense of relief for you. They feel exposed. And within that reflection, there is great agitation because the one outcome they depended on, you remaining in a state of confusion, did not unfold. You chose to cultivate your own garden. And that cultivation, that is what they cannot comprehend. The disturbance they carry now, it is not truly about you. It is about the inner truth they are not yet ready to face. It is about the fading of a control they thought was real. It is about the new reality that their methods have lost their hold. And this is deeply unsettling for one who depends on illusion for their sense of stability. You have become a reflection of their own choices, not because you intended to cause pain, but because you simply chose to no longer participate in a cycle of pain. This is what truly touches them. The fact that you did not engage in the struggle, the fact that you chose authenticity over retaliation, the fact that you turned onto your own path, not with a great noise, but with the steady, quiet dignity of someone who has found their way. And now they must reside with the natural outcomes of their actions, the resonance of their own untruths. You see, those who seek to control others often play a short-sighted game, forgetting that life is a long and unfolding journey. They seek momentary validation, sacrificing enduring peace. But inner peace never arises from dominance. It arises from truth, and for this reason, they find no rest. They are unsettled, restless, and agitated, not because you harmed them, but because your inner strength endured. There is a profound insight in walking away from a dynamic that was never aligned with your true path. It shifts the entire energy of the situation they sought to create. It gently invites them to face the reality that authentic power does not come from control over others. It comes from self-mastery. And that is what your journey now represents. Your calmness, your refusal to engage in conflict, your dedication to your own inner work. These things disrupt their illusion. Your quiet focus speaks with a powerful resonance. And this quiet, it is unsettling for them. Let them feel their anger. Allow them their agitation. This anger is simply a reflection of a deeper discomfort. It is the fear of being seen for what they truly are. It is the fear of losing relevance now that you have disengaged. It is the fear of their methods no longer working. And that fear, that is a state of mind they have created for themselves. You do not have to enter it. You do not have to justify your journey. You have already found your true victory. not by playing a better game, but by choosing to step off the board entirely. That is strength. That is clarity. That is transformation. They believed the dynamic was about power, but you have shown them it was always about integrity. And in that regard, they fell short. Not because you defeated them, but because they compromised their own spirit while trying to outmaneuver a simple truth. Now, they must live with the echo of that. You, on the other hand, are free, not just from their influence, but from the part of yourself that once resonated with it. And that freedom, that evolution, is a state they may not understand, because it requires a humility they have not yet cultivated. Let them be agitated. Let them have their turmoil. You have a different life to build. They perceived your gentleness as a vulnerability. And that was their first and most significant misinterpretation. They believed your compassion was an opening to be exploited, not a strength to be honored. They looked upon your patience and saw it as inaction. They witnessed your loyalty and concluded you could not see clearly. But this is the fundamental error of those who see the world through a lens of control. They assess others using the measure of their own inner fragmentation. They assume everyone is engaged in the same pursuit of manipulation, of masks, of self-serving ends. So when they meet someone authentic, someone grounded, someone who offers their heart with sincerity, they are met with confusion. And instead of treasuring it, they see it as an opportunity for advantage. They saw you as predictable. They thought they could subtly influence you, keeping you within their sphere of control, like a boat tied to a dock. You offered forgiveness when none was sought. You gave more chances when there was no true intent to change. And in their own framework, they viewed your grace as confirmation that you were somehow lesser. As if setting boundaries was the only sign of strength, and offering compassion was a sign of foolishness. This is what occurs when one tries to understand a deep soul through the shallow perspective of power dynamics. But what they did not grasp, what they could not see, is that kindness is not a weakness. It is a conscious choice. It is strength held in reserve. It is power guided by wisdom. It is the choice to offer peace when you possess the capacity for much more. And for a long time, you chose peace. Not because you feared disharmony, but because you held a quiet hope that they might recognize the value of something true. You believed that if you showed them what it meant to be genuine, to be steadfast, they might find that same quality within themselves. That is not weakness. That is faith. That is heart. And it is a rare quality. So you may have remained longer than was wise. You may have explained things to ears that were not open. You offered nourishment to a soil where nothing would grow. And they used this against you. They turned your virtues into what they perceived as vulnerabilities. And in doing so, they told themselves a story that you were naive, that you needed them to navigate the world, that you lacked the fortitude to ever walk your own path. This story allowed them to feel a sense of control. It justified their actions. It allowed them to maintain their illusion of being the orchestrator. But then came the moment they did not anticipate. The moment when you finally saw the dynamic for what it was. When the fog lifted. When the accumulated weight of their actions became clear and your own spirit, tired and ready for stillness, decided it had given enough. And you did not shout. You did not strike back. You did not lower yourself to their state of agitation. You simply ceased to be available. You stopped replying. You withdrew the access they had once taken for granted. You chose yourself. And this, more than anything, unsettled them. Because the one thing a controlling energy cannot handle is losing the person they believed they could always influence. The one who kept giving even when receiving nothing. The one who remained quiet out of compassion, not fear. They thought the dynamic could continue, but it requires two participants to maintain such an imbalance. And you simply picked up your focus and turned toward a new horizon, quietly, with dignity, without any need for a dramatic scene. Now they are agitated, not because you did something wrong to them, but because you finally did something right for yourself. Because When you stopped meeting their chaos with your compassion, when you stopped allowing them to define your reality, you took their illusion of control and let it dissolve. And now they are left with a truth they cannot alter. You were never weak. You were simply kind. And they mistook that for something they could command. Let that truth settle within you. They are not disturbed because you failed them. They are disturbed because you began to rise. Because your strength illuminated their insecurity. Because your growth highlighted their stagnation. Because your silence created a space so profound it overpowered all their noise. They are not just angry at you. They are experiencing the dissonance of their own actions, though they will not voice it. Because from a deeper place, they know they were in the presence of something rare, and they chose to exploit it instead of honoring it. This is the nature of a life lived through illusion. It often leads one to damage the very things that could have offered them solace, and by the time the realization dawns, it is too late. The kind person has found a new path. The loyal one has grown wiser. The silent one has found their center. Not to argue, not to persuade, but to walk forward with conviction. And that is when they finally see that your kindness was never a weakness. It was a gift. One they did not value, and one they can no longer receive. Now all they have is the stillness, the emptiness, the space left by someone they thought they could hold on to forever. And no matter how loud their disturbance becomes, no matter how much they try to change the story to soothe themselves, the truth remains. They created an imbalance, and its own nature caused it to collapse. Because in trying to diminish someone they saw as lesser, they only revealed the true lack of balance within themselves. And you are not broken. You are not bitter. You are clearer, stronger, wiser, and most importantly at peace. Your growth revealed the nature of their deception, and that is why they find your presence unsettling. You see, when you begin to rise, when you start your inner work, evolving, becoming more than the limited version they encouraged you to be, you become a gentle threat to the foundation of their worldview. Their influence was only effective when you were uncertain of yourself. Their sense of power was only present when you questioned your own value. As long as you remained in the midst of their projections, they could maintain their narrative. They could tell themselves you were dependent on them, that they were a step ahead, that their view of events was the only one. But once you began to awaken, the entire fragile structure started to falter. They existed in a reality where you were kept small, where your potential was obscured by doubt and a loyalty that was misplaced. A world they helped sustain, where your own sense of self was slowly diminished. Not always through overt actions, but through quiet dismissals, through the distortion of memory, through withholding warmth, by rewriting the past. These were not just isolated behaviors. They were patterns, perhaps not always fully conscious, but deeply connected to their need to maintain a superior position. Because if you were ever to see yourself with clarity, if you were to ever recognize your own inner strength, it would reveal how unstable their own foundation truly was. And then the change began. Perhaps quietly at first, you began to observe more. You started to create inner space. You stopped reacting in familiar ways. You no longer felt the need to explain yourself, nor to repair what they continually disrupted. You became still, aware, grounded, and this was unsettling to them. The more grounded you became, the more their own lack of grounding was apparent. They could feel the energy shifting, and from this, a disquiet began to emerge. Growth does not just transform you. It illuminates everything that was out of alignment. As you evolve, you naturally carry a clarity with you, and truth is a powerful force. It does not need to be loud. It simply is. Your calm presence begins to contrast with their inner chaos. Your quiet boundaries highlight their lack of respect. Your new standards of being reveal their old patterns of manipulation. You did not need to confront them. Your very existence as a person who refused to remain in illusion was the change. And that is what deeply disturbs individuals like this, to be seen for what they are. For the first time, they were not guiding the story. They could not reframe your words, could not shift responsibility, could not distract you with a sense of obligation. You had changed, you had grown, and growth makes it impossible to return to illusion. It is like awakening from a difficult dream. Once you are conscious, you cannot pretend you are still asleep. They saw this shift in you, and it felt unfamiliar, threatening. And what was more, you did not just grow in private. Your very energy began to change. Others started to notice. You began to radiate a different quality of being. The image of you they had presented, the one who was fragile, unstable, or overly emotional, was dissolving. And in its place stood someone centered, composed, and clear. Their narrative no longer matched what the world could see. This disparity became difficult for them, as it forced them to face their own inconsistencies. They grew defensive, even agitated. Suddenly, you were acting differently, perhaps too distant or selfish. But you were not being selfish. You were simply no longer willing to be used. And that subtle distinction pierced their illusion like a ray of light. You no longer offered them the same access to your inner world. No more emotional tides for them to navigate. No more moments of vulnerability for them to exploit. Your stillness became more resonant than anything you had ever said before, and it left them feeling exposed in a world where they were accustomed to navigating through shadows. For here is a simple wisdom. They never held power over you. They only held the illusion of power, an illusion you created through your own uncertainty. Once you became certain of your own truth, that illusion dissolved. And without it, they were left to face their own inner state. And that truth was challenging and uncomfortable. Not because you wished them harm, but because your light revealed how shadowed their own actions had been. And some people cannot bear to be seen in the light. It is easier for them to resent your transformation than to face their own part in the past. But you did not grow for them. You grew for peace. You grew because you were tired of making yourself small to accommodate someone else's fragile sense of self. You grew because you were tired of suffering in quiet while another claimed to be the one who was wronged. You grew because you realized your life was meant for more than mere survival. And in doing so, you stepped out of the cycle. You became the one who found their way out of the illusion. And in that act of self-respect, you became a challenge to them. Not because you were unkind, but because you refused to be controlled. They do not resent you for lying. They resent you because you stopped believing their lies. That is what they cannot move past. That is what quietly follows them. Not that you exposed them to the world, but that you revealed them to themselves. And now, every time they see your peace, your growth, your quiet confidence, it is a reminder of who they could have been if they had not chosen a path of manipulation. It reminds them that they lost something authentic, something true, and they let it go with their own hands. That is the quiet beauty of your transformation. It did not just restore you, it revealed them. Your silence has a greater resonance than their anger, and that is what causes them such unrest. Consider that when someone is accustomed to controlling a narrative, they rely upon your response. They are nourished by your explanations, your sorrow, your frustration. As long as you are reacting, you remain engaged with their energy. You are still participating in the dynamic. But when you become silent, not from a place of defeat, but from a place of clarity, they lose their anchor. Not just control over you, but the illusion that their needs mattered more than your own inner peace. And that silence becomes a reflection they cannot turn away from. They wanted you to be loud. They wanted a breakdown, a plea, an explosion of emotion, because then they could have pointed and said, "You see, they are the unstable one. They are the problem." This is a common pattern for manipulators. They stir up a storm and then blame you for getting wet. They push and pull and distort your reality until you lose your footing and then criticize you for stumbling. But when you chose to no longer participate in this dance, when you stopped offering them your emotional energy, you took away the very resource they depended on, your engagement. This is the one thing they did not foresee. that your strength would manifest as stillness, that your greatest act of reclaiming your power would be to walk away quietly, leaving no door ajar for further discord. They do not know how to interpret this kind of centeredness. They see silence as a withdrawal of affection or as a punishment, because they exist in a world of noise. They are accustomed to drama, to conflict, to constant motion. Your silence is not just a lack of words. It signals the end of their central role in your life story. And that is a difficult truth for someone who built their identity on being in control. They are agitated now because their influence has waned, because they cannot reach you in the old ways, because your detachment communicates something more profound than 1,000 arguments ever could. It says, without a single word, your opinion is no longer required for my journey. I will not offer you another piece of my spirit. And that, more than any debate, quiets their influence. It dissolves their false sense of superiority. It invites them to sit with the fact that they are no longer the center of your universe, that you have reclaimed your time, your focus, and your dignity. And they cannot twist this into something negative, because there is nothing left for them to grasp. Silence is confusing for those who are used to causing harm without consequence. They expect a fight because fighting implies that you still care deeply. But when you withdraw your energy, when you no longer need to explain or justify or defend your peace, it points to a deeper reality. They are no longer a defining factor, not for your peace, not for your path, not for your future. And that realization, more than any spoken word, is what unsettles them. It is not that you did not have things to say. You had oceans of unspoken pain, libraries of betrayal, volumes of truths they were not ready to hear. But you learned that not everyone is deserving of your voice. Some people only hear your words as opportunities to misinterpret them. Some listen only to formulate a response, not to understand. So you chose silence not from fear, but from wisdom. Because when you have seen enough, felt enough, lost enough of yourself trying to make the clear understood, you realize that sometimes the most powerful action is to say nothing at all and walk toward your own peace. And the great irony is that your silence is now the most resonant thing in their life. It echoes in the spaces where your presence once was. It follows them into the quiet moments when their distractions fade, when the attention they needed from you has gone still. They thought they would feel victorious by pushing you away, but now they are left in the company of themselves, and your absence reveals everything they tried to hide. They tell themselves you are cold, that you have changed, that you never truly cared. But from a deeper place, they know the truth. They were given chances. You did not just vanish. You offered opportunity after opportunity, tried to mend what they continued to break, and stayed long after your own light began to dim. Your silence was not abrupt. It was earned. It was the final, compassionate act of someone who had finally recognized their own worth. And that realization, that you are no longer willing to shrink yourself for someone who refuses to grow, that is the truth that now resides with them. Let them feel their rage. Let them send their accusations into the void, hoping to provoke a response. That is no longer your energy to carry. You do not need to defend your peace. You do not need to explain your silence. Those who understand need no explanation. And those who do not were never truly listening. What matters is that you are free, that you no longer need to be heard to know your own truth, that you have outgrown the need to prove anything to anyone who only saw your heart as something to be controlled. In a world full of noise, your silence is your sanctuary, and to those who once drew energy from your chaos, it is their mirror. Their anger is a shield for their shame, and it is a heavy burden to carry. On the surface, you may see rage, bitterness, or an air of righteousness. They may cast blame, create new stories, or pretend that they are entirely untroubled. But deep within, behind that wall of noise, is a quiet truth they desperately wish to avoid. They are aware of their actions, and from a place they do not visit, they know their path was not one of integrity. The anger is simply a covering. It is the armor they use to avoid facing the deeply uncomfortable feeling of having damaged something good, something that did not deserve their carelessness. Shame is a powerful undercurrent. It does not shout as anger does. It whispers in the quiet moments. It meets people in the silence. It is what they are now experiencing, but they may never acknowledge it. To acknowledge shame is to acknowledge a misstep. It means setting the armor aside. And for those who rely on manipulation and illusion, who deceive themselves as much as others, facing their own actions is a terrifying prospect. So instead, they look outward. They project their unease. They find external reasons for their inner state, because to look inward feels as though it would shatter them. You became a mirror. That is the essence of the problem. Not because you admonished them or sought to expose them, but because you walked away with your own integrity whole. You did not descend to their level of discord. You did not engage in retaliation. And your composure unsettles them more than anything. Because when someone is filled with this inner conflict, seeing the person they wronged find peace and dignity is a difficult reflection. It forces them to feel everything they have been trying to suppress. Your quiet journey holds them more accountable than any argument ever could. Every thought of you becomes a reminder of their choices and what was lost. And that is the most difficult part for them. Not the loss of control, not the loss of access, but the loss of your genuine respect. Because even if they pretend it does not matter, it does, deeply. You were not just a person they hurt. You were someone who saw their better nature, someone who offered grace, who saw past their broken parts. And now, the knowledge that they betrayed that trust, that they burned a bridge they lacked the wisdom to build, that is a shame that cuts deeply. But they do not know how to process this feeling. So they bury it under layers of anger, of denial, of projection. They will paint themselves as the one who was wronged, because it feels easier than admitting they were the source of the disharmony. They will say you left them, that you changed, that you were too demanding or too sensitive. All of these stories are constructed to avoid the profound regret that lives just beneath the surface. But inside, where truth resides, away from the noise and the defenses, they know. They know you were a source of goodness in their life. They know you did not deserve their actions. And they know they cannot go back. There is a reason they may still be thinking of you, still speaking of you, still attempting to rewrite the past. It is not because they are at peace. It is because they are not, and they cannot be. Because what was lost was not superficial. It was not casual. It was not something that can be forgotten or buried beneath new distractions. Your presence was authentic. And now that it is gone, they are forced to sit with the reality of who they are without your light to reflect back at them. That is where the shame resides, in that space. They did not expect to feel this way. When they made their choices, when they acted from a place of imbalance, they thought they were securing their position. They thought they were being strong, but a strength built on untruths and pride eventually reveals its own weakness. Because when you betray someone who was genuine, you do not walk away unaffected. You carry the energy of that choice with you. You carry the echo of it, even if you pretend otherwise. And over time, that echo can begin to disrupt the soul. You may never hear them admit it. They may never offer an apology, or take responsibility, or speak the plain truth. But do not mistake their silence on this matter for peace. There is a quiet conflict within them now. One they created, and one they must navigate alone. And every time they see you living in your own truth, growing, healing, becoming more than they could imagine, it stirs the shame once more. Because you were supposed to remain diminished. You were supposed to remain small. They thought that if they could dim your light, theirs would appear brighter. But all they did was obscure their own vision. Let them be agitated. Let them project. Let them wear their anger like armor. You do not need to respond to it. You do not need to defend your own name. Truth, in its own time, is its own defense. And eventually, their armor will crack, because rage is a fire that burns out, But shame is a shadow that lingers. And when all the noise settles, they will still be left with the truth they cannot outrun. They allowed something beautiful to pass from their lives, not by accident, but by choice. And the consequences of that choice will follow them far longer than they anticipate. You, on the other hand, are free. You felt the pain, you faced the darkness, and you chose to rise. You let go, not because the situation did not matter, but because you knew your own well-being mattered more. That is what creates the difference. You have owned your story. They are still running from theirs. And until they stop hiding behind the mask of anger, they will not find peace. Because deep down, they do not hate you. They are struggling with the self that they became when they lost you. Their anger is not a sign of power. It is not a sign of dominance or of being in control. It is a shield, a covering for something far more fragile. A shame that has been growing quietly within them. And what is unsettling for them now is that the shield is beginning to feel heavy. No matter how loudly they speak, how much they blame, how many others they try to sway, there is a quiet resonance inside them they can no longer ignore. The gentle, persistent awareness that they have brought this upon themselves. You did not cause their downfall. You did not seek to expose them. You did not take revenge. But your growth, your silence, your refusal to return to the old dynamic, this did something far more challenging from their perspective. It revealed that they were never as powerful as they had believed. It demonstrated that your value was never dependent on their validation. And now they are in a state of turmoil, not because you wronged them, but because you did not. You did not lower yourself. You did not become consumed by bitterness. You chose to rise. And that kind of rising forces them to see the profound gap between who they presented themselves to be and who you have actually become. The more they see you thriving quietly, healing with grace, and moving forward in your own life, the more difficult their own reflection becomes. They cannot find peace with who they are without your presence to manipulate, without your heart to engage, without your kindness to absorb. And this, more than anything, is where their shame is rooted. Not just in the act of having hurt you, but in the loss of the one person who still saw good in them when they could not see it for themselves. That is the part they will never articulate. You were their place of quiet. You were the one who met them in their brokenness. You were the mirror that showed them their potential, their hope, a path toward redemption. And instead of choosing to grow with you, they chose to take advantage of that goodness, because growth requires courage, vulnerability, and accountability. They did not have the capacity for that. So they turned against the very person who could have helped them transform. And now, long after you have moved on, they remain tethered to the very state of mind they created. Anger is their familiar response, because shame feels like weakness to them. They were conditioned to dominate, not reflect, to blame, not to be introspective, to navigate the world through control rather than through connection. So they create noise. But their anger is without foundation because it is not based on a present injustice. It is a defense mechanism, a shout to drown out the whisper that continues to follow them. You lost something real, and you did it with your own hands. This is why they cannot stop replaying the past. This is why they may look for signs of your life. This is why they attempt to twist the narrative or reinvent history. They are trying to outrun their own shame by changing reality after the fact. But no matter what they say, the fundamental truth does not change. You were sincere, you were present, you were loyal, and they were careless with that gift. They engaged in a dynamic and lost someone they now realize they never truly knew how to value. And instead of finding humility, they project outward. But every time they do, the shame deepens its hold. Because from a quiet place, they know you never fought them. You simply outgrew them. And here is the truth they cannot face. You did not need to ruin them. They are doing it to themselves. The longer they refuse to accept their own actions, the longer they carry that invisible weight. And over time, that weight becomes heavier. It isolates them. It makes them rigid. It taints every new interaction because they have not healed, they have not learned, they have not changed. They are still living in the same pattern, blaming others, reacting to shadows, while you have stepped into a version of yourself they will never have access to again. Let that be enough for you. You do not need to explain your side or seek a final conversation or wait for an apology. Sometimes your own inner peace is the only closure you will ever receive. And it is enough, because while they are trapped in a cycle of denial and blame, you are free. You are no longer seeking their approval. And that freedom is a kind of quiet justice, an enduring justice that echoes every time they remember how things could have been if only they had chosen a different path. So let them wear their anger as armor. You know what lies beneath it. You have seen the truth, you have lived it, and now you have risen from it. That is something they will have to live with long after their noise fades. Because rage may be loud, but shame has a long memory.